Charleston, South Carolina, a city draped in history and mystery, where every cobblestone street whispers secrets of a past that refuses to fade. The sunlight filters softly through moss-draped oaks, casting long shadows over grand colonial buildings adorned with intricately carved wooden doors and towering windows that have witnessed centuries of triumph and tragedy. Tourists flock here, drawn to the city's undeniable charm, its picturesque facades, and the promise of Southern hospitality. Yet beneath the polished surface lies a deeper, darker truth. A society fractured by the scars of wars, racial divides, and centuries of battles fought not only on fields but in the hearts and minds of its people. Charleston's walls, majestic though they stand, have never been truly unyielding. They conceal layers of pain, injustice, and unresolved conflicts. The polished courtyards glimmer under the sun, but a storm brews silently, threatening to shatter the fragile peace that veils the city. It is here, in this charged atmosphere, where history clashes with the present, that a new battle is about to unfold, one that will challenge the very foundation of justice and equality. In this city, where time seems both suspended and relentless, the echoes of the past entwine with the cries for change, setting the stage for a confrontation that will reverberate far beyond Charleston's historic streets. On a crisp autumn morning, Victoria Miller stepped into the hushed courtroom of Charleston, her presence quiet yet unmistakably commanding. She wore no judge's robe, no tailored suit that proclaimed authority, just a simple, unassuming outfit that belied the fierce determination burning in her eyes. Every measured step she took echoed against the cold marble floors, the sound cutting through the heavy silence like a promise. This was no ordinary arrival. Victoria wasn't here to play the part expected of her by a system that often sought to diminish her. She was a warrior, a beacon for those silenced and overlooked for far too long, carrying with her the weight of history and the hopes of a community yearning for justice. Around her, the room watched, not with reverence, but with skeptical eyes that questioned her place, her power. To many, she was simply a black woman stepping into a space that had rarely welcomed her kind as an equal. Yet beneath their doubt simmered a tension they couldn't ignore. Victoria's gaze swept the room, sharp and steady, unflinching in the face of invisible barriers and whispered judgments. She knew the journey ahead was fraught with resistance, but her resolve was forged in decades of struggle. As a lawyer, a prosecutor, and now as a judge, fighting battles against a system rigged to protect the powerful. This courtroom, cold and imposing, was about to witness more than a trial. It was the ground where old prejudices would be confronted by unwavering courage, where the quiet strength of one woman threatened to unravel years of injustice. Victoria Miller's arrival was the spark lighting a fire that no shadow of doubt could extinguish. At the prosecutor's table stood Robert Hayes, a seasoned police officer whose years of service had earned him a fortress of invincibility. His posture radiated confidence, bordering on arrogance, as he shuffled papers with practiced ease, eyes occasionally flicking over the room with a possessive glare. To him, this courtroom was his domain, a stage where his authority went unquestioned, protected by a web of anonymous calls, shielded colleagues, and a record padded with letters of praise. In his mind, the law was an unbreakable fortress built to safeguard men like him, and no one, especially not a woman like Victoria Miller, could topple it. When his gaze landed on Victoria, it was not recognition, but dismissal, a black woman who, in his eyes, lacked the power to challenge him. He saw her as insignificant, an outsider who had no real place in this world steeped in tradition and control. But what Robert failed to grasp was that beneath Victoria's composed exterior lay a storm ready to erupt, a fierce resolve shaped by years of fighting against systems designed to silence her kind. His arrogance blinded him to the seismic shift about to shake his world, the moment when his unquestioned dominance would be cracked wide open. As he adjusted his papers and surveyed the people around him, a subtle but palpable tension began to weave itself into the fabric of the room. Unseen by him, eyes followed Victoria's steady scan of the courtroom, locking onto him with a quiet but unyielding fire. In that brief, charged moment, the true battle lines were drawn, not between two individuals, but between a long-entrenched system of power and the relentless spirit determined to bring it down. Robert Hayes stood unaware that the very ground beneath his feet was shifting, that the fortress he relied on was being undermined by the woman he had so casually dismissed. The courtroom held its breath as the moment unfolded. Robert Hayes, eyes cold and dismissive, cast a fleeting glance at Victoria Miller. The air thickened with tension, charged by the weight of unspoken histories and simmering power struggles. Without warning, a sharp, resounding slap shattered the stillness, echoing like thunder against the courtroom's solemn walls. The sound wasn't merely the sting of flesh meeting skin. It was a violent rupture in the very fabric of justice, a challenge hurled against the sacred ideals the room was supposed to uphold. Time seemed to freeze. Lawyers halted mid-note, reporters stopped their frantic scribbling, and witnesses stared wide-eyed, caught in the rawness of the act. Victoria's cheek burned with the unmistakable mark of that blow, yet she did not flinch, did not utter a cry or recoil in pain. Instead, she stood unwavering, her gaze locked onto Robert with unyielding strength, turning what could have been a moment of submission into a powerful declaration. Around them, the courtroom transformed. This was no longer a simple exchange of authority, but a battlefield where arrogance met resilience, where the old order was forced to reckon with a force it had long tried to suppress. The slap became a symbol, a stark reminder of the deep wounds inflicted by centuries of injustice, but also the spark igniting a fight that could no longer be ignored. The shock rippled through everyone present, stirring questions heavy with doubt and hope. What would Victoria do next? Could she harness this moment and turn it into a catalyst for change? Or would the weight of the system, so long protected and fortified, crush her spirit like countless others before? The courtroom, once a place of quiet procedure, had become a crucible of destiny, with the clash of power and principle laid bare for all to witness. In that suspended breath, the course of the city's future hung delicately in the balance, poised on the strength of a single woman who refused to be broken. Victoria Miller stood motionless, the sharp sting on her cheek a vivid reminder of the violence she had just endured, yet her body betrayed no sign of weakness. No tears welled in her eyes, no anger flared in her voice, only a steady, unshakable calm. The courtroom was suffused with an oppressive silence, as if the very air had thickened, heavy with disbelief and tension. Every eye was fixed on her, watching, waiting to see how she would respond to the affront. But Victoria's silence was far from surrender. It was a bold act of defiance, a refusal to allow that single moment to define her or diminish the cause she carried. In that quiet, resolute stillness, she reclaimed the narrative, transforming pain into power. The slap had been meant to break her spirit, to intimidate and silence, but instead, it forged her resolve like steel tempered in fire. The murmurs and gasps that rippled through the room could not mask the undercurrent of change stirring beneath the surface. This was no ordinary courtroom drama. It was a reckoning with the legacy of oppression itself. Victoria's gaze bore into Robert Hayes, unblinking and steady, speaking volumes without a word. The silence that engulfed the room became a canvas on which the true battle was painted. Not just for justice in a single case, but for the dismantling of a system that had long thrived on the silence and suffering of people like her. Those watching sensed the shifting tide, the fragile balance between fear and courage tipping irrevocably. In that moment, Victoria embodied the spirit of resistance, a quiet storm gathering strength to reshape the very foundations of the courtroom, the city, and the society beyond. Victoria stepped forward with deliberate grace, closing the distance to the prosecutor's table where Robert Hayes still stood, stunned and off balance. Her voice cut through the suffocating silence, cold and unwavering, each word a sharp blade slicing through the remnants of his arrogance. Did you truly believe you had the right to strike me just because I am not wearing a judge's robe? Because I am a black woman? Her gaze bore into him, demanding accountability not just for herself, but for every person silenced and overlooked by this very system. The courtroom seemed to shrink around them, every breath held captive as her words hung heavily in the air. Robert faltered, opening his mouth to defend himself, but finding no refuge in excuses or denials. Her fierce conviction had stripped him bare. "This isn't merely about you, Hayes," she continued, her tone unrelenting. "It's about the entire structure that protects those who abuse their power, the system that has long perpetuated injustice under the guise of law." The room absorbed her indictment, whispers erupting like small fires as the weight of her challenge settled on everyone present. Victoria wasn't just confronting a man. She was dismantling the armor of a deeply entrenched hierarchy, exposing cracks that had been carefully concealed for decades. Her presence, once doubted, now radiated undeniable authority, not granted by a title or a robe, but earned through unyielding courage and moral clarity. The questions that rippled through the room were no longer about the slap itself, but about the future it heralded. Could this woman break through the impenetrable walls of prejudice and corruption? Could she bring to light the truths the system had labored to bury? Victoria's steady voice was the spark igniting a reckoning, her challenge echoing beyond the courtroom walls. As she stood firm, a symbol of resistance and justice, it became clear. This moment was not just a confrontation, it was the beginning of a revolution. Robert Hayes stood frozen, the full weight of Victoria Miller's words crashing over him like a relentless tide. The confidence that had once cloaked him like armor now unraveled, thread by thread, exposing the raw nerves of fear and doubt beneath. His eyes darted around the courtroom, seeking refuge in familiar faces, but found only a sea of expectant eyes and silent judgment. The very allies he had counted on were nowhere to be found. The room no longer shielded his arrogance, but amplified his vulnerability. The power he wielded so effortlessly was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand, disappearing into the shifting currents Victoria had stirred. He realized, too late, that this wasn't just a battle between two individuals. It was a reckoning with a system long overdue for change. The old order that had protected him was cracking, and Victoria stood at the epicenter of its collapse, unwavering and resolute. Around them, whispers morphed into murmurs of hope and defiance, a quiet chorus rising beneath the surface. Hayes's posture faltered, his usual stoicism replaced by unease, as he grappled with the growing realization that his reign of unchecked power was ending. Yet despite the crumbling facade, a flicker of resistance lingered within him, a desperate grasp for control slipping through trembling hands. But Victoria's gaze, sharp and unyielding, held him captive, an unspoken declaration that the fight was far from over, and he would no longer stand unchallenged. In this charged moment, the courtroom had transformed into a battleground of shifting power, where silence spoke louder than words, and courage was the ultimate weapon. Hayes, once invincible, now faced the profound loneliness of a man confronting not just his adversary, but the inevitable tide of justice rising against him. The day after the courtroom confrontation, the tension that had electrified the room seemed to follow Victoria Miller into every corner of Charleston. It was then that Chief Nolan, the formidable head of the city's police force, made his unexpected visit to her office, a visit laced with an unspoken warning. Nolan's expression was cold and unyielding, a mirror reflecting the entrenched power of the system Victoria had dared to challenge. His voice cut through the thick atmosphere with chilling clarity. Victoria, what you're doing won't be allowed to continue. This system, it protects itself. You will not change it. But Victoria met his icy stare without a flicker of doubt or fear. Standing tall amidst the looming shadows of resistance, she spoke with unwavering resolve. I am not here to confront you personally. I am here for the forgotten, the silenced. This system has allowed men like Hayes to abuse power unchecked for too long. I won't be silent while it crushes those who cannot speak. Nolan's face tightened, the warning in his words barely masking his uncertainty. He had seen many attempts to shake the foundations, many battles lost before they began. But in Victoria's eyes burned a fire that no threat could extinguish, a fire fueled by years of injustice and a relentless pursuit of truth. Outside her office, whispers began to spread. Colleagues hesitated, rumors swirled, and shadows lengthened. Mysterious calls, veiled threats, and quiet isolation attempted to choke the rising tide of change Victoria represented. Yet she remained unshaken, knowing that resistance was the price of progress. The system fought to protect itself, wielding power both visible and hidden, but Victoria had chosen a path of courage and perseverance. As Nolan's chilling words echoed in her mind, Victoria understood that this was no longer just a legal battle. It was a war against a deeply rooted network of corruption and silence. and she was ready to stand alone if she had to, lighting the spark that would ignite a movement beyond the walls of any courtroom. The walls around Victoria began to close in, not from the courtroom's stone and timber, but from the relentless pressure mounting beyond its doors. Whispers turned into rumors. Colleagues who once offered support grew distant, and the shadows cast by powerful forces stretched long and menacing. The phone calls came, veiled threats wrapped in polite words, warning her to abandon the fight or face consequences too severe to bear. Yet with every push to silence her, Victoria's resolve only hardened. She was no stranger to adversity. This resistance was but another trial in a lifetime spent battling injustice. The more the system tried to bind her with invisible chains of intimidation, the more fiercely she fought back, determined to expose the corruption festering at its core. Her investigation dug deeper, unraveling a tangled web of cover-ups and alliances designed to protect men like Robert Hayes. Witnesses, once too afraid to speak, began to find courage in her unwavering presence. Some faltered under pressure, disappearing into the shadows of fear, but others stepped forward, their voices piercing the silence that had long suffocated truth. Victoria knew this was no solitary battle. It was a fight for every silenced soul crushed beneath the weight of a broken system. Each leaked report, every whispered threat, was a reminder of the stakes. The price of challenging a fortress built on years of deceit and power abuse. But she refused to waver. The flame she carried burned brighter with every attempt to snuff it out. In the face of growing isolation and escalating danger, Victoria stood unyielding, a beacon in the encroaching darkness. Her fight transcended a single courtroom. It was a crusade to dismantle a system entrenched in corruption, to reclaim justice for those who had been forgotten for too long. And no matter how fierce the storm, she would not be broken. In the end, Victoria Miller's relentless pursuit of justice did more than secure a conviction. It shattered a long-standing fortress of corruption that had thrived in Charleston's shadows for decades. The courtroom buzzed not merely with the verdict, but with the seismic shift her courage had ignited. Robert Hayes, once untouchable behind a shield of power and influence, was finally held accountable, his arrogance reduced to silence beneath the weight of truth. But Victoria's victory transcended the personal. It sent a clear, thunderous message to all who believed they were above the law. Justice was not a distant ideal, but a force to be reckoned with, fueled by those brave enough to stand and fight. As the gavel fell, the ripples of change spread far beyond the walls of that courtroom. Victoria had become a beacon of hope for the voiceless, the oppressed, and the forgotten. Proof that even the mightiest systems could be challenged and transformed. Though the road ahead remained fraught with obstacles, her triumph illuminated a path forward, inspiring others to rise from the shadows and demand fairness and dignity. Victoria's journey was a testament to the power of perseverance, courage, and unyielding conviction, that justice is not handed down, but fought for, again and again, until it prevails. As Charleston breathed in a new dawn, the city knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. A revolution sparked by one woman who refused to be silenced, a symbol of resilience against injustice. Her story echoed a universal truth. No matter how entrenched the darkness, light finds a way to break through, carried on the wings of those who dare to believe in change.